An extra $3.57 a day. The government makes a modest increase to the unemployment benefit. Controversial MP Craig Kelly quits the Liberal Party, leaving the government with a one-seat majority. Facebook ends its news ban after a deal with the Australian government.
And coming up on The Business, not backing down, Competition Czar welcomes Facebook's capitulation on restoring Australian news. Watch our exclusive interview with ACCC Chair this hour.
This is ABC Late News. Hello, I'm Michael Tetlow. The federal government has announced the first permanent increase to the unemployment benefit in decades. Job seekers will receive an extra $25 a week, or less than $4 a day. But it's been labelled cruel and mean-spirited by those who've long campaigned for more. Here's political reporter Jane Norman.
As the COVID crisis pushed hundreds of thousands of Australians out of work, a generous safety net was there to catch them.
They were able to live a better life, feed their children with decent food.
JobSeeker was effectively doubled, but as it's tapered down, Kath Botelow has noticed a rise in demand for help.
People cannot get by without emergency relief at the moment.
Good afternoon, you think this is Jackie.
From April, the temporary supplement will go, but in its place, a permanent increase.
We need to ensure that we have a system that is fair and sustainable.
The government announcing JobSeeker will rise by $25 a week, taking the total weekly payment to around $307.
The Prime Minister has
the cost to the budget, $9 billion over 4 years.
This is the single largest increase to the JobSeeker payment in a year since 1986.
But broken down, people on the dole will only pocket an extra $4 a day.
The government has made a deliberate decision to drop people below the poverty line,
prompting questions of adequacy after years of campaigning for a permanent boost.
Measly, mean-spirited and complete betrayal of what is needed.
Together with the increase, job seekers will be able to earn up to $150 a fortnight without their payment being affected. But the rules are being tightened. From July, recipients will have to apply for 20 jobs a month. If they get one and turn it down, the employer will be asked to dob them in to the federal government. And after 6 months on the dole, job seekers will be required to do intensive training. By boosting JobSeeker during the COVID crisis, the government effectively conceded the payment could never snap back to its pre-pandemic level of $40 a day. Today's increase is modest at best, but that hasn't stopped one Coalition MP claiming it's too generous and telling colleagues he can't support it. That means the government may need Labor's support to legislate this rise, and the opposition is yet to settle on its position. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
Scott Morrison's control of Parliament has been reduced to the slimmest of margins after outspoken MP Craig Kelly quit the Liberal Party. He'll now sit as an independent, leaving the coalition with a one-seat majority. The Prime Minister insists it'll be business as usual, but there could be some complications ahead. Political editor Andrew Probyn explains.
Crisis? What crisis?
The government will continue to function as it has successfully.
The Prime Minister projecting calm as his government's slim majority slipped to the bare minimum.
The government has led Australia through the worst situation we've seen since the Second World War. We will continue to do so.
Craig Kelly, the freewheeling Sydney MP, is leaving the Liberal flock, wanting to instead freelance in support of unproven treatments for COVID-19, including a chemical used to deworm sheep.
I want to be able to speak out fearlessly and frankly about those.
He'll now do that from the crossbench, reducing the Morrison government to a one-seat majority.
I learned it at the same time as he announced it to the party room.
And with Parliament still dealing with questions of workplace culture, Craig Kelly is facing his own. The controversial MP having ignored the PM's demand, he sacks senior staff member Frank Zumbo, who's under police investigation for alleged inappropriate behaviour towards women. Zumbo is already the subject of an apprehended violence order preventing contact with a former intern in Craig Kelly's office.
I have long expressed to Mr Kelly my concerns about that staff member.
Zumbo denies any wrongdoing and will contest the AVO.
There are no criminal charges against him. He's entitled to natural justice and the presumption of innocence.
Craig Kelly's act of betrayal hasn't tumbled the government into minority rule, nor is the renegade MP threatening supply or confidence, so the coalition won't be too concerned just yet. But with Liberal Tony Smith remaining Speaker, votes on the floor of the lower house are potentially tied from now on, and Labor knows from its own experience in a hung parliament that numbers always count.
Can the Prime Minister confirm that today the government has lost its majority on the floor of the House of Representatives?
If the Leader of the Opposition is feeling so confident, Mr Speaker, about the performance of his opposition, Mr Speaker, well then perhaps you'd like to bring on a motion.
The arithmetic of power now a dare. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
Australian news stories will return to Facebook after the federal government promised to tweak laws forcing tech giants to pay traditional media outlets for access to their content. Last week, Facebook blocked news in Australia, taking down pages from media companies and stopping people sharing links to stories. The Treasurer says he's received a personal assurance Australian news will be back up soon after agreeing to some changes to the government's news bargaining code.
Mark Zuckerberg said to me today that that will occur in coming days. Obviously, that's a question for the engineers at Facebook, but certainly their commitment, both in their statement as well as in the words to me directly from Mark Zuckerberg, were that that news content will be restored to Facebook's Australian platform.
Facebook has apologised for other pages, including those run by state health departments and charities, being taken down in last week's cull. The legislation looks set to pass Parliament this week. The Victorian Premier has declared he's prepared to rip up Crown's casino licence if it's recommended by a Royal Commission. The government has come under fire for taking so long to establish the inquiry, despite evidence of serious wrongdoing by Crown piling up for years. As Richard Willingham explains, there are also concerns about the probe's terms of reference.
The Premier was back in familiar colours and territory this morning, spruiking his big projects.
Where are we heading now?
That's the question punters want to know. Is Daniel Andrews prepared to rip up Crown's licence?
Yes, because this is a Royal Commission to determine whether they're fit to hold that licence. So if you're having that process, you have to be clear that you'll implement the findings. It's going to be a rigorous process.
The government's hand was all but forced after a New South Wales inquiry laid bare the serious issue at Crown's flagship Melbourne casino. But that inquiry only came after years of whistleblower and media reports alleging illegal activity.
Daniel Andrews has been dragged kicking and screaming to calling this Royal Commission.
Victorian politicians have been running a protection racket for Crown Casino, and I think some Victorian politicians will be very nervous now.
On the eve of the 2014 state election, Crown founder Lloyd Williams gave the Premier this backing.
I'm the executive of the Packer Estate, and James is going to kick every goal he can for you.
Former Labor and Liberal MPs and party figures have worked for Crown. Both parties have received tens of thousands of dollars in donations, and the current chair is former Liberal Senator Helen Coonan. The terms of reference are narrow. It includes the public interest, but not the role of the gambling watchdog or Victoria Police. And that's a cause of major concern, because it means the systemic issues that allow this all to happen may not be properly addressed.
You have an enormous gap. And I would question whether the Royal Commission will be able to get to the bottom of what has been going on.
It also has to look at the relationship between government and Crown, the police and Crown, and why Crown was allowed to get away with this behaviour for so long.
Commissioner Ray Finkelstein has an August deadline, giving Crown months to get its house in order.
I suspect they won't lose their licence, but they've got a lot of goals to kick before they retain it.
It's a bet few people will be making. Richard Willingham, ABC News, Melbourne.
The true reach of the coronavirus crisis has become more apparent in the United States, with the country recording 500,000 deaths. President Joe Biden has led a vigil in Washington to honour those lost, with grieving families remembering their loved ones. North America correspondent Catherine Diss reports.
Very bubbly, extremely smart, funny, smiled all the time.
12-year-old Elizabeth English started feeling unwell in early December. She never showed symptoms of COVID-19.
On December the 4th is when she first stated that she wasn't feeling well. And then December the 9th is when she passed away.
She died from multi-system inflammatory syndrome, a condition which causes parts of the body to become inflamed. Children diagnosed with the condition either had coronavirus or were a close contact.
She was not given an official diagnosis until her autopsy. So we left the hospital not even knowing what she passed from.
The pandemic has now claimed 500,000 American lives. Across Washington, church bells tolled 500 times at the cathedral, each chime representing 1,000 victims.
As a nation, we have to resist becoming numb to the sorrow.
The US President Joe Biden leaning on his personal experience of family loss to pay his respects.
I know what it's like when you are there, holding their hands. There's a look in your eye and they slip away.
This time last year, former President Donald Trump was publicly downplaying the threat of COVID-19.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear.
12 months ago, America hadn't recorded a single death from COVID-19. So the enormity of 500,000 people falling victim to the virus is difficult to comprehend.
People 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe even 100 years from now are going to be talking about this.
Carrie English is using the loss of her daughter to raise awareness of the little-known risks COVID-19 poses to children. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Washington.
And as the vaccine rollout continues in Australia, data from the United Kingdom shows the jabs are having a major impact on hospital admissions and deaths. The British Prime Minister has unveiled his roadmap out of lockdown, saying the vaccine is tipping the odds in the UK's favour. Europe correspondent Nick Dole reports.
Lab results are one thing, but real-world data is better. In the UK, more than 17 million people have already had a jab, and early results show both the AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines are highly effective. In Scotland, they've cut elderly hospital admissions by at least 80%.
We're now travelling on a one-way road to freedom, and we can begin safely to restart our lives and do it with confidence.
But the road out of lockdown in England will be a long one. Schools will be first to reopen in a fortnight, and in April, restaurants and pubs can start serving people outdoors. In May, London's West End will come alive again as indoor entertainment reopens. But there'll be limits on social contact until at least June. The lockdown here is so strict that even sitting on a park bench with a friend is against the rules. But within a fortnight, that kind of social interaction will be allowed again. And all being well, it's hoped that by the end of March, once the weather here is a little warmer, up to 6 people will be allowed to meet up outdoors. While the pace of the relaxation's too slow for some, many welcome a more cautious approach.
I think the biggest risk is them rushing into it and opening too much up too soon.
The government says if vaccine-resistant variants get out of control, the roadmap will be torn up and restrictions will return. But the Prime Minister's confident this grim winter won't be repeated.
There is light ahead, leading us to a spring and a summer which I think will be seasons of hope, looking and feeling incomparably better for us all, and from which we will not go back.
After 3 national lockdowns, the whole country is hoping he's right. Nick Dole, ABC News, London.
Showers and a top of 29 degrees for Brisbane tomorrow. Showers too for Sydney with 25, a partly cloudy 21 in Canberra. Similar conditions for Melbourne, Hobart, partly cloudy, 22, a mostly sunny, 23 in Adelaide, and a possible storm with showers for Darwin. And that is ABC Late News to the moment. I'm Michael Tetlow. Stay with us for the business.